God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. Well, welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. I'm delighted to have Charles Marr with me. And Charles is on his way to work in Auckland, New Zealand, where he is the founder, owner, and CEO of Made Group. Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brad. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and keep your eyes on the road. Yeah, it's great to be chatting with you. Charles and I met recently in Colorado, and spent some good time together. And I was excited to share his story with you because Charles has a big vision that God gave him at a fairly young age. And I know we're living in a time of stinking, shrinking thinking, where a lot of people are really feeling under pressure economically and so on to trim their vision, shrink their vision, and not hang on. But Charles, you've got a big vision. Tell us a little bit about, well, let's get into your background first. So you grew up, you were born and raised in New Zealand, is that right?
Yes, born and raised in New Zealand, and then went to Hong Kong and China between the age of 3 to 10, and then got back, spent the rest of my life here in New Zealand so far.
Fantastic. So you speak 3 languages, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Kiwi, is that right?
Yes, I do.
Great. I shouldn't be talking to you right after the All Blacks have just beaten the Springboks in the second rugby test in South Africa.
You should be glad that I haven't following in detail on these matters. Otherwise, yes, it will be a very depressing conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, Charles, it's great to have you on. Now, in your journey, obviously, you worked in real estate for quite a while, which is what your company is doing now. You've worked in private equity, in real estate. But let's start where you are. God's given you a calling to build cities. What does that look like? And I mean, that's quite a big calling for somebody, for anybody, who's old, who's young, but for somebody who is how old were you when God gave you that calling to build cities?
Well, I was 21, and my first exposure of it was actually one of the places I went to in New Zealand that was kind of like a resort. And I was going in, that was the first time I ever could afford one. It was my 21st birthday for my girlfriend at that time. Yeah. And I remember I starved myself for 3 months to save up just to go there for one night. And when I went in, there's a level of excellence, a level of beauty, which I just haven't seen before. And it inspired me to think, wow, you could create places that well integrated. And there's a level of God's beauty that I saw in the way that they were able to enhance built form. And then I went to America. With the remaining savings I had at the time with my family, and I remember that I could afford to take a hit there and back, and that's about it. And I went there and visited Washington, D.C., and one of the strongest impressions I had was just how profound the founding fathers document that the Constitution was for this nation, and it was almost alien. I've never seen something of such nature before. And that kind of gave me a glimpse of how to understand the United States far more than simply just an economic engine that most people see. Yeah. And so in some ways, I came back and my mother asked me on a plane when we were flying back, says, Charles, what seed are you going to sow with your life? What tree are you going to plant? And I sat down and as I was praying, I just had a strong sense that the energy, that the level of frequency that God's put in my heart was the frequency of founding nations and cities. Yeah. And so it's rather than, obviously I was very overwhelmed and I kept the secret for many, many years. But we're now 10 years in, and I think I'm now getting quite comfortable with the fact that we're doing projects of national significance when we build cities.
Yeah. So fantastic. So let's talk about the current project. Then I'm going to backtrack into your past, because it sounds like a glory story. You must have come from a wealthy background, gone to good schools, born with a silver spoon in your mouth, landed with your bum in the butter, and now you can go off and you can do big property developments. So let's talk about what you're doing currently with the city that you're building, and then we'll back up into your story. So currently, what's the scope of the enterprise that you're working on right now, the city that you're working on?
Yeah, so probably just clarify, we have city founders. So well, let's say a first mover startup. Think about a startup, but you start up a city rather than a company. Right. And so we don't build the whole city because we don't need to. I think God wants us, our specific calling is to jumpstart the kingdom in places. And so the two areas in which we are focused on, New Zealand is the two strongest areas of growth and GDP for the country in the next 30 years. And rather than just letting it grow, however commerce takes it, we were quite deliberate about strategically locating ourselves so that we can sow a different kind of growth trajectory. And the space that excites me the most in our team is, we were quite familiar, but also quite impressed by how much fear, guilt, and shame could build. You could build a whole funding private equity family office system, and you can build just a huge amount of media and just vanity just on the basis of fear, guilt, and shame. And so, if you look at most of our cities, it's built on the fear of missing out, the guilt of the guilt of not doing what's right in terms of responsibility. So you go and work hard, or shame, the idea of I need to do it just for the sake of my name, whatever legacy I have, or whatever the image I have in the world. Think China, and so we found that we were astonished that has been the currency that's been sown into our cities, and we wonder why we end up with results that are suboptimal, because that's not the best of what it means to be made in the image of God. And cities ultimately is an agglomeration of many, many image bearers, and God does not look like that, and so from my point of view, we wanted to start, at the most probably in a basic sense, at the first principle level. What does it look like to start a city with faith, hope, and love? And what does it look like for that faith, hope, and love to sustain? And that's why it's important to be a city, not just a one-off initiative where you do it once and it was great for a moment and people forget about it. What does it look like to be a daily thing? It's a daily currency to have faith, hope, and love played out.
Yeah. So you've kicked off a development where you've got the ability to lay the foundations in that community and say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. This is the design. But you probably have to build 10% of it, and then the rest can be built by others, provided they carry your values and follow your patterns. Is that your philosophy?
Yes. So I think we like the idea of first fruits. What does it look like to give your first 10% of the city, and we move in as the first 10% to take the highest risk of being the first mover, to build the infrastructure, to build schools, to create the centers, to create the parks and recreation and retirement villages and affordable houses, and just to create the first 10% of the ecosystem that the city will ultimately, hopefully, find excited about and want to imitate. And so we don't have direct control of the 90, nor should we, just like the Levites don't. But we think if we do our 10% well, we should be able to inspire generational change.
Okay, fantastic. Great. So you've got an influence in the other 90, but you're building about 3,000 houses or so, 3,000 homes, and then there's another 27,000 or so, roughly about a 30,000 home development. Is that right?
Yes. So, to do anything of an ecosystem, you probably need at least 2,000 to 3,000 houses. Just to start a center that can work, and rail stations and whatnot. So from our point of view, though I say we did 10%, but 10% of a city it could take you 10 to 15 years to build.
Yeah. Great. And so you're up and going. Obviously, this is a big vision. So because you've got a big vision and you're following God in obedience, does that mean no problems? Or does a big vision mean big problems? Which way does it go? Or challenge?
I think our biggest risk is to not have God with us. That's the biggest risk, because you can have the most strongest balance sheet, and you can have. I have seen this myself personally, because in my line of work, I meet billionaires and I meet all kinds of people, and they may have money, but they do not have wisdom that only comes from God, and therefore they end up how would I put it? Struggling to deploy that capital wisely, and end up wasting a lot of it and not getting any meaningful impact at all or change. And so, if from a place of risk, I think that I'm in the lowest risk industry right now, because I've got the calling of God, and as long as I can rely on that provision and not be wavering on that matter, big or small, He looks after you. But make no mistake, it is extremely demanding in relation to its test for your heart and the uprightness of your heart with Him.
Right.
And so there's a pleasure that God sees in the loyalty and just the purity of you with Him, and He uses these level of trials to kind of bring that out.
Yeah. So as Moses said to God, look, unless you go up with us, we don't want to go, because if people don't see that you're with us, then we've got a problem. So you're saying actually stewarding the presence of God and making sure that a big project doesn't blow out the presence of God in your life, which is quite something.
Yes, I mean, one thing probably very humbling about building large-scale communities in the first part of the city is that to the world, it's foolishness.
Yeah.
Because no one wants to be the first mover, because it is the most costly position to be in, and that's the second mover that really makes the money.
Yeah, right.
And also you take all the risk. But then what they don't realize is that risk is relative.
Yeah.
And so if you have, most people can't handle the moving parts of the changing human conditions and also the changing environment around us. But I think sometimes when we can come from a place of faith, hope, and love, we have a better handle on that. We have a better chance of actually bringing order from chaos.
Yeah. So you're saying that the calling of God reduces risk?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It reduces risk if we were able to align ourselves to see it the way that faith, hope, and love wants us to see it.
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm just walking across a fire. I hope you interrupted too much, but yeah.
No, it's no problem. Yeah. Okay. So keeping some pretty basic things, faith, hope, and love, the opposite of fear, guilt, shame, etc., and having that as the foundation for what you're building has been a guiding light for you, it sounds like.
I always say this: Lord, you have not failed me yet. Because of that, I will not fail to be obedient. But the moment that you do fail me, I will then question my methods.
Yeah.
But He has not yet for the last 8 years. Yep.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Okay, so Charles, let's dig into your background a little bit. So you grew up immigrant parents, as I understand it, who were in New Zealand from somewhere in China, from Hong Kong, was it, or from mainland China?
Mainland Wuhan, and Wuhan. Yeah. I spent time in Beijing as well as Hong Kong, most of those two places.
Okay, yeah. So your family comes to New Zealand and begins working there. Tell me a little bit about your growing up and how that's prepared you for what you're doing now.
Right. So one of the angels that God sent in my life is my mother. So my mother and father divorced when I was probably 7, while we were still in China.
Yeah.
To be fair, I've never seen Dad at all in my life. I've maybe seen him once or twice. But Mom was an inspiration. She was more like a dad than Mom, because she had to go and raise 5 kids herself. Yeah. And I remember when we first arrived in New Zealand, we landed the plane. She got, I think she took us all to McDonald's. Yeah. And pretty much after we had McDonald's, that's all the money she had left. And she had enough money to take a taxi and find a way to feed the family for the next day. Wow. That's how we started as immigrants, because you can't carry money around. And from there, she was able to become one of the most wealthiest kind of enterprises in the country. And then for just in the financial crisis time frame, when things went belly up, just before that, a bit earlier. And so my family went through bankruptcy when I was 13.
Yeah.
And I had the experience of being homeless and reliant on others to provide food and, you know, subsidies and all those things that you get, the good things you get from governments to help us out a little bit. And I knew how much shame it felt to get a handout versus simply just going and earning it yourself. But because my mother went through bankruptcy, she couldn't work for 3 years, so we couldn't even earn our dignity. It was almost like it was a period in which, you know, humbled us to show that it's okay to rely on others, but then we should not stay here, and we must be a blessing back when we're done. And so, really, because of the struggles at home, I struggled to how would I put it? I struggled to kind of have decent meals, and so my study wasn't too well at school. I ended up nearly dropping out of school because I was, you know, always going to the toilet, having diarrhea and whatnot. But one of the things I remembered in the process that I still remember to today, we as a family, when we were wealthy, we had our own, we had a mansion and individual rooms that I only see my mom once per week, and every time I go see her, it's that I go and ask for money. But now, man, we're so united. I mean, there's time we go to the dinner table together and we say, hey guys, we got $10 to make it through the week. What kind of vegetables should we get? How much rice should we get this week? And how do we split it? And how do we kind of leverage most of the little that we have? As a family, I've got 5 kids here that you got to feed. And that was precious moments that brought our family together. It saved our family, actually, to be fair. Because otherwise we'll be very, very much a commercial family only. Really, I was an atheist all the way up to when I was 16. That I met the Lord when I was 17. And I wouldn't say I met the Lord in a very kind of profound Jesus way, but it was more simply someone convinced me that. And also, I have a lot of gratitude for the United States, because you guys have sent through a lot of people that has affected my life, at least in terms of Americans, where there was a professor that spoke about evolution that convinced me there could be a possibility there's a maker in the world. And so, in some sense, without that conversation, I'll still be an atheist that's probably suicidal and, you know, victimhood mindset. But, you know, feeling that I'm entitled to it because I'm in a position that's less advantageous, than most.
Yeah. So you came to faith as a teenager, late teens, and how about the rest of your family? Have they been impacted? Have they come to faith? How does that stand?
All right, so let me give you a very subtle example of how I actually this is probably one of the most powerful witnesses that I had. It was my third sister. I had 3 older sisters and a younger brother. So my third sister Elizabeth was the first to be a Christian in our family. Yeah. And I have to say, that time when I was atheist, I always scoffed at her and said, look, only religion is for the weak, because you can't handle the reality. Just because we are in a bad position doesn't mean that you got to go and find escape. You know, this weird thing that you're doing. And I never quite understood. I was quite a faithful atheist, where I would fundamentally challenge everything that she believes in and think it's laughable. And you know, and then there was one day when, as a family, we take turns of washing dishes at home. And there was one day where it was my turn to wash dishes, and I just didn't want to. I can't be bothered, so I just kind of walked around and left the kitchen, and then kind of just hid a little bit, pretending that it's not my job. And then my third sister, just went up and just started washing dishes with a smile on her face, and she had this joy and this peace about her, and I was at the corner just sneakily looking at her at the wall. I'm thinking, what is this? Like, I just could not comprehend. How could you possibly be happy when you're doing someone else's work and you get no gains out of it? Like, it does not make sense of an atheist that she has something that I want. She has something that's gone beyond selfishness. It's gone beyond self-survival and self-superiority, and all protection. She's giving her time secretly, like she's not even like trying to tell people, secretly doing dishes for me, and I can't get over myself. And then And then there was a desire for me to find something that could help me to get over myself. Because most religions out there, it's still self-centered about how I can be saved, how I can be. Whereas actually, it was encountering, the Creator God, where I said, "Look, I'm. He is the point. It's God-centric, not self-centric." And that was the change in my life. Because as soon as that took place, then my life started making sense. Because before that, I believe in Darwin, and the survival of the fittest, and it was a very depressing life because I was not as talented as others are, and nor wealthy. I did not have those platforms, so naturally, you should self-select and get out and just take your life because you're a burden to society.
Wow.
And I was quite. That was a very real thing. Like, okay, I'm taking up oxygen right now. That someone else could be better because someone else could survive stronger. Why should I take up space when someone else can actually have a better chance of survival? Yeah, I'm thinking about those things. Yeah.
Wow, that is fairly depressing, and just such an outcome of a bad philosophy. But and just such a simple thing that your sister did that caught your attention.
Yes.
Yeah, quite amazing. So you went on from there. You studied in different places. You studied in New Zealand and also overseas a bit. And at what point did you break out from working for others to working for yourself?
So I think the first thing is I studied civil engineering and business, and then the Lord said to me, "Look, I didn't let you. This is the fun part about being with God. Like, it's never predictable about what He wants to do with your. You kind of think, oh, I've got some leverage for you, Lord. And Lord, and He said, I don't need it. I need to give that up and show. And I actually want to work with your weaknesses. So I graduated from my engineering school thinking that I'm going to make a difference as an engineer, and I loved mathematics, and then the Lord said, like, I didn't put you through engineering school so you can be an engineer. I put you through engineering school so you can learn about reality in the world, how the world sees and how the world works it. And I want you to reverse engineer. and it was funny because even to today, when I go into meetings now with investors and funders and all kinds of engineers, I will know the details better than the engineers. Because I would have done the hard work of knowing how do you quantity survey, how do you do all those little things that gets the details right. So I think there's a level of wisdom that God gave me. But cut long story short, all my friends went to first class honors and got the scholarships. I decided that I'm not going to do engineering, and I was going to go into business. And I said, Lord, how do you want me to start? Because I have no connection at all. Because my mom went bankrupt. It's not that helpful, when you have a bankrupt history to go into business. No one wants to do business with me, and it tainted. You already you're Asian first, and second, you're young, and also you've got a background that just is a handicap to you. So how do I get in, Lord?
Yeah.
And so the Lord said, why don't you just do something humble as a start. Go and translate English to Chinese, Chinese English. And by the way, this you do not need an engineering degree for. You do it when you have a language degree, Yeah. So I go in and got a job, which all I did was translate English to Chinese, Chinese to English. And I kind of felt a little. My friends asked me, why are you doing this? And I said, look, this is I don't mind. I've been in lower places. It's fine as long as I can follow whatever I feel the Spirit's saying to me. Yeah. What I did not know is that though I started that way, man, God blessed it. Like, that's why I really, really understand, like, even if the circumstances seem underwhelming and but if God has favors on you, everything you touch is multiplying. So I go into this role as a translator. Then I started saying, well, look, I'm so free right now because I don't have a title. The guy's not even giving me a proper pay. I'm pretty much the little assistant that's carrying the water boy in the room. and so what do I have to lose? Like, really, am I going to hold on to their job here? Like, as if this is my treasure? No, I'm going to use the job and see what I'm going to do to fulfill whatever God's for my heart. And so, and as I was translating, I started giving advice and started, talking to the client that I was representing to translate, and actually giving very strong advice about how to negotiate with this person. This person's really saying this, and actually, when there's one sentence said to me, and I will have 5 sentences said back. And to cut a long story short, I had a lot of fun in the boardroom, and God actually taught me about how decision making was taking place in the boardroom, and a very humble position. It's like the lizard in the palace, you know. And then from there, I got promoted to project kind of assistant to project manager, project director, head of department, and managing director, and eventually I became owner. And so that was a period of 2 years. You know, and just speak, but that I really believe that was the seed. If I didn't start as a translator, if I started as a, you know, some fancy this and that, it might not have been so productive in the terms of how God has multiplied it, because everything, every word spoken, every project done just started multiplying, and they couldn't deny it. So I grew their whole real estate arm from to the private equity. They had one project, I grew to 10.
Yeah. So fascinating principle about being willing to be obedient and just go in where God tells you to go in. Don't worry about the title. Don't worry about the pay. But you get an education from God and favor from God through obedience.
Yes. I think God is always looking for true, genuine love. And so when we do it for any other reason other than Him, He's jealous.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I don't want to share that with anything else. I want all of that, the loyalty. I have to be the reason why you do it. It's just like a man for a woman. Like, I don't want your wife to love you because of what you have. You want her to love you for who you are.
Right. Yeah. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 verse 3 said, you know, your work produced by faith and your labor of love, your labor produced by love. So God wants our labor to produce by love. Okay, so you're loving God through your labor. You end up owning that business, which is a private equity business, and it was specifically in the real estate space, right?
Well, no. So what's happened? So when I say owner, what I mean to that, I got to managing director. I was 24 then. I was running in New Zealand at that time, probably the largest portfolio in private equity. So I was in a good place, getting good bonuses, good pay, good reputation, and everybody wants to meet with you. And then, you know, it was strange enough, even at that position, I thought, surely, Lord, now you need to put me in business. You want me to win this for you. And the Lord, you know, and God said to my heart, now that I've given you all that, I'm wanting to let it go again, Charles.
Yeah.
And I honestly had to struggle. My Lord, it makes no sense. Why would you give me the platform to give it away? Like, I'm in a position where I can influence a lot of young people and this and that. Why would you want me to give this position away? And do what? And the first thing he said was, no, I want you to go and start something of what I put in your heart. Because right now you're still managing someone else's seed. Now I'm going to sow a seed in you, through you, that is going to be city making. And this employer won't do that. Your current private equity firm, as much as you're good at it, will only do apartment towers and the typical developments. And that I know with my eyes closed. And so he's saying, well, pretty much what God said to me is, fulfill your destiny. And actually, I taught you real estate and all of these high-level decision-making so that you can apply these skills to fulfill the call that I put in your life at 21. And so that was the hardest decision because I was about to get married. And man, I needed stability. I wanted stability. I wanted all the platforms. And it just, you know, I did not want to lose my bonuses as well. Anyways, but the Lord calls, and I learned enough at that point. And this is really important, that if this was the first task that He's asked me, I don't think I would have made the decision. But this was the third or fourth time now that I followed Him, and I know He never let me down. Like, He's always showed up, and you know, He's never failed me. So I said, Lord, I'm going to go and be radically obedient right now. I will tell my employer that I'm going to quit. By the way, my employer was very, very angry because he was saying, Charles, you're probably one of the youngest I've ever given such promotion to. And I feel a little bit like Joseph. He wants to put me in prison.
Yeah.
He's like, I'll show you a lesson about without the capital base that I have, what you can actually do without a platform. And what God's really saying is that, Charles, without Him, do you think you can still do it? And the answer has to be yes, because I got you, God. I don't need a platform. Okay, I need you. And so He taught me that lesson. So I quit. And you know, my employer became actually partially at the side watching me to see me fail. And a lot of people in the street was say, "Hi, who did this guy? Is Icarus? He flew too high, and he's gonna learn a lesson today. He's gonna fall, and we're all gonna teach him a lesson about how naive he is." So it's definitely foolishness at this point. Do foolishness to the world, but I was faithful to God, and So I started my own company. It was extremely hard because I remember I had to go through 18 months of like daily, I'll have 5 rejections. And those rejections were significant rejections of no. And I was trying to start a city that got to my heart. Raising capital was hard. Getting approvals for starting a new city. Who the heck do you think you are, Charles? Like starting a new city, you've never done this before. Why would politicians trust you? All those things had to go from scratch. And then so 18 months of that, I had to go through one surgery. That was the only surgeries I have ever done in my life where I had to cut. I thought that was cancerous, but it was something that had to cut through my neck. And then I guess after that, because the kindness of God, he didn't drag out that process any longer. So after 18 months, I achieved probably a national miracle on rezoning an area that actually at that time was completely forgotten. It was like the last place that anyone would think about developing, and it was almost like it was like invisible in Auckland. And then I'll just go fast track right now. Now we look back at 5-8 years from there. It became the most important place in all of New Zealand.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's when God's with us. Like, why would you? Like, that's just like so strategically important. It is a project of national significance. They need to do it right. They have a huge engine. Government spending billions and billions trying to make it jump started. And then that's what we managed to see. Then because of what we see 8 years ago, and not only is this a strategic location now, not forgotten, but actually is strategic for some very good reasons, which is we want to create a place of belonging, which is what we sold on, and the government's taking that on board. So in some ways, the influence has worked, and there's a shift in the dial. I wouldn't say that it's completely kingdom as we hope right now, but it gives one step closer to the kingdom. Yeah.
Right. So in terms of scale, 30,000 houses, how many hectares are we talking about, or acres are we talking about that you've managed to get a hold of?
So acres wise, I think you're talking about hectares, right? You're talking about 2,000 hectares. So you're talking about it's a community of 100 to 150,000 people. You're talking about probably 30 to 50,000 jobs, and it's approximate acres wise. I guess it's a 4,000 acres. Well, I'm not sure what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so it's a significant project, and you've been at this for 8 years now, right?
Yep. So it's like a little company style. Now we're in the 8th year. You see, the seed capital started at 8 years ago.
Yeah. And in terms of the design of the city, I know, Charles, from our prior conversations, you try to do some things that carry the purposes of God into the design of the city versus just plow the land, put in infrastructures, put up some model homes and pop up thousands of houses. You're wanting to get people into a purposeful way of living, as I understand it. And is that the overarching vision for the city, or how would you describe it?
So one of my favorite books is actually The Meaning of the City by Jacques Ellul. And what I spent it was a hard book to read, but then when I got to the essence of it, one thing I loved is that 2 things I picked out of that, and that's what I'm building off really. The first one is that God redeems the man and also all works that is done in Christ. Mm-hmm. That is very important because I reckon that no matter what I do is but filthy rags, okay, compared to the glory of God and how he does it. Yet, if it's done in Christ, he will redeem it and complete it. And so my work is not in vain, you know? And last thing, the most discouraging thing you want to feel about when you're doing stuff because of me, is that I'm doing all this, pouring my heart and soul. It's just vanity, it's just vain. It will never last more than this life. What's the point? Because cities normally should outlive you, and so I'm not looking forward to 50 years later what it looks like. I'm looking forward to what it looks like 500 years from now for the city. So that's one that gave me a lot of comfort that actually my goal is to do it in Christ. And what does that look like? I can express a bit more. And knowing that the first part, he redeems me, he's not. And then also the works that we do. The second one, which is very profound insight for me, it took me a while to come to grips with, was that, like, first, what is the rush of trying to build anything that is like the New Jerusalem when really we should just wait for it? You know, like what's I mean, we know we can't do it, only he can. What's the rush? We got all eternity to go and spend that time doing it. Why do it now, Charles? And what good can it actually do? I came to realize that this, as I dug into this topic, I realized actually no, there is a huge effect that we have right now in this life. What is it? It's that our cities, like or not, just like a house, just like an office, just like our family, is by nature conditioning us as human beings. We are in a conditioning engine. And we are reactive beings. We are reacting to the air we breathe. We're reacting to the water we drink. We are reacting to the light that we see. And the weather, hence why the weather has a huge impact on how one interprets identity as well around the world, and how one interprets meaning. Like if you live in a weather that's always rainy, you have a view of life that's different from one that's always sunny.
Right.
And so when I think about cities, I started realizing, oh, wait a second. Our cities has been primarily built with, that I mentioned before, about on the basis of the currency of fear, guilt, and shame, that it's actually conditioning us into believing that currency. And so in some ways, it's like a school that is biased. A school that's biased on teaching you a particular method that's actually not reflective of the true nature of God. Yeah. And so my goal as a city maker, as building a new ecosystem, is not that I go change people's hearts, because only God can do that. I cannot build the kingdom of God. But what I can do is to minimize intergenerational curse and maximize intergenerational blessings, and also create a neutral platform that people can have the free will to choose good and evil. Because right now, we by default choose evil because that's all it's offered to us. We don't even know what faith looks like anymore. We don't even know what love looks like anymore. We don't even know what hope looks like anymore. We kind of have a vague cinematic impression of what that is. You know? Yeah. What does that look like lived out? How many people have you seen that lives a courageous life in your community and is celebrated that way and is actually understood well? How many people truly loved unconditionally rather than I love because I can get something and I can stir up treasures and when God judged me one day? That's still a self-centered love, and hope that is just that is truly far-reaching. About you talk about how people, where we have a culture right now where people are shrinking their vision, they're not expanding it. And because there's no hope for the future, they're worried, and they say, let's get real about reality. And so I guess from my side, my hope is to create a platform where people have the equal opportunity to choose faith, hope, and love. It's not ridiculous. It's actually a norm, just like fear, guilt, and shame is a norm right now. But there's still a choice at the end. We can't force people into it, and nor can you brainwash anyone into it. It's only by freely choosing that you can actually those things come alive. So my job is to create a neutral platform to counterbalance the very biased platform we have right now.
Right. So you can design, in the design of your city, you can get a sense as to what the lifestyle should be like, and you can incorporate that into the design of your city.
Yes. So to go to your point about question about design, so if you apply that level of thinking, the thinking that I have is, okay, let's just talk about streets right now, roads. We have a lot of roads in our cities. How do we design these roads where people can feel a level of dignity that they can believe again? When you're walking, how do you grow in faith? How do you grow in your love for your neighbor? Yeah. How do you grow in your hope for where you're going? Yeah, that's because right now it's more like I'm afraid that the car might hit me. I feel guilty for driving, so I'll walk a little bit, and I feel shameful that maybe for whatever reason that I should walk rather than do what I normally do. And so it's just a motivator, and the street is not designed for the beautiful things that we want to nurture. And so you can actually design a street where, for example, we decided to give a 3 meter shared path plus a 1.8 meters kind of cycle lane. And all that does is that the whole street, around 76% of the street, is actually for the pedestrian. As soon as that happens, visually we can start realizing, okay, in this particular road, I'm actually honored as a human being. Right. Like I take the majority share of this road, 76%. Yeah. Whereas 24% belongs to the moving car. Yeah. Where previously every street is that a car gets the asphalt and most of the carriageway, and we get the sliver of 1 meter to walk on, or 1.5 meters to walk on, and we better not fall out of that street, that footpath, because we're gonna get hit.
Yeah.
And we're nervous for our kids. We can't freely trust a neighborhood, which we're afraid someone might run them over. And so how do you design a safe street that truly can have you to explore and to be childlike again? And so then you got to work out spacing very well. You got to work out not just spacing, but also, all right, how do you design the green landscape in such a way that it's not overdoing it where you're hiding too much, but where you're having too many plants, you're walking into a forest, but then you have enough plants that's delightful to look at. So you look at every day and there's a change of season, there's a change, you can pick up the details because life is in the details. So how do you make it super interesting and intriguing and curious for walking? You're like, I can't help but to walk tomorrow and check out what's going on again with the changes, and you're picking it up. Because when we drive, we move way too quickly that we miss all the details. We can't see the details. And so and we were made to be in a walking pace so we can pick up the details. Just like ants were made to walk. They're not meant to go on a roller skate or go on a hyperloop. So I mean that's just a visual delight. And what does it look like? What does it feel like for the wind to be on my breeze on my skin again? What does it smell like? All your sensory system activated towards what is beautiful, what is intended in the beginning, what is faithful, what is lovely, and what's worthy. So that's just one example of street. You can do the same for the village square, the village center. You can do the same for how you might deal with the building of a school. How do you actually set a school up? We're creating a unique playground that's unlike any playground where you're in a typical playground. We're creating one that's not only accessible to disabled people, but it becomes very exciting. So the wheelchair can go do the swing with the person that doesn't have a wheelchair, and they make friends with each other. And there's this beautiful diversity going on and learning of each other's different parts in society. And so there's I guess what I'm describing is there's a world of possibilities of expression of what this could play out to be like. For me now, by approaching it this way, city making is an act of art, an act of worship and art, where I'm always improving on it. I learned last time I did something I can do better this time. I learned a bit more about deeper about faith, hope, and love that I can incorporate in my next design. So that's my journey. Yeah.
So you've got narrower streets, wider sidewalks, and you have tons of trees. You've planted a lot of trees, right?
100,000 plants, roads. I gave up on road naming. There's too many roads we built there. I had hundreds of roads that most people want to name a road behind their name. I'm like, forget it. I'm not interested. And look, from our point of view, we created like a campus, I reckon, a campus of retirement village. Even for the retirement village, most retirement villages are licensed to occupy, and that's about it. And you kind of die and move on, and then they get the capital gains and whatnot. We deliberately decided that we will only pick the retirement village that is going to give back the capital gains, because it's wrong to take away intergenerational blessing. That belongs to someone else's family, not you, and not just you to take everything. And they just spend life servicing your. And so every single decision you can make towards faith, hope, and love more. And what I've seen is that, make no mistake, Brett, the places we build are not like utopian and perfect. Like, there are stuff that happens still, but when people go on the land, and this is very interesting, when people are driving on the land, they have some sort of idea, but man, when they get off, when they start walking, they feel it. They keep saying, Charles, when I'm in the car, I'm like, okay, it's okay. Architecture is pretty, it's okay. It's not like world class. Like I've seen better. I've seen better in Europe myself, But when I walk on the street, my goodness, I can feel something breathing in me. I'm changing as I'm walking in this place. And that's what I'm designing the town for. I'm not designing it for the car, because you won't feel all the elements. I've designed it for the person to be so intuitive that you actually get healed in the process of being here. And so people come here, well, they don't even live here. They just walk and they spend time.
This reminds me a lot of the Garden of Eden, walking with God in the garden, your work being your worship, and God speaking through what he created. There was no Bible, there was no church, there was no nothing, but Adam and Eve knew what God was like through what he had created, through his work products. And so really that's an expression of the glory of God. And you have to, as Proverbs 25 verse 2 says, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, to search out a matter is the glory of kings. So you're going through that discovery process. It's not like you get a template. It's a co-creating with God, trying to imagine with God, hey, what would it look like if Jesus was walking these streets, if God was designing this town, if people were living in a city that God had actually designed himself.
Yeah, I think I love the idea of I love that scripture that you quoted, because that's something I always wonder. God, why don't you tell me earlier? Why don't you just tell me so I can do it faithfully? And that's something that I also will wrestle with my son. And my son told me this actually. My 5-year-old son. I went to the Middle East with him just for kind of like a Egypt, Jordan, and Israel tour. And in that process, as he was growing up, he started to whisper in my ear. Now, this is very important because no one ever whispered in my ear, even like other than my wife. Like no one's gone that close to me before, to actually speak gently in my ear. And so it was a very strange feeling. But then it was a delightful feeling because I suddenly realized, I will only let my son to do that. I wouldn't be weird for anyone else. So intimacy was the key behind. I believe that one of my good friends is James Houston. He's the founder of Regent College. He's 99, turning 100 this year. And he told me this. He says the city of God is built with techniques, but the city of the world is built with techniques, but the city of God is built with relationships, and intimate relationships in particular. And so I've been thinking a lot about intimacy and how do you create intimate places? How does a street make you feel closer to God? Because scripture says all creation has divine nature, and so that man is without excuse. It's in there. How do we create when we want to create like he does? Whatever we create should inspire who he is. Because nature definitely inspires us of who he is. He's a subtle and gentle God. He's not a commander, military, kind of. He can, but he doesn't rule that way. He rules in a way that is very gracious. And so, to go to your point, I asked God, why don't you show me the plans? And he says, well, son, I want to whisper to your ears. I want a lot of. If I give you the plans, you won't want to draw close to hear me whisper to you. I'm far more interested in intimacy than I am for you to do something for me. I'm just using this as an excuse for you to learn to know me. And so I think that's really important. People as a company made, we actually spend a lot of time tracking how are we doing and our growth of our knowledge of God. Like that's actually a KPI. Like if we're not growing as a company or as individuals in the company, and if we're not more humble today than we are yesterday, did we actually come to know the Lord and what we do? If the answer is no, first, something has to change. But second, like what is more wiser moving forward? Because let's make it clear, God does not need us to do any works. He chooses us to work through us because in his wisdom that he think he can win humanity back, not just the works, but also the heart of humanity. So if he just wants to get the job done, he could do it with a click, with a spoken word like he did in creation. But there's something about love that is far more than just getting a task done. And so for me, I've been, we've been going down this journey. What have I said? The plan, just like love, just like faith, just like hope, it's actually a person. I do not need the plan when I know he who holds tomorrow. He is the plan. And he has the right to change the plan and be creative about it. And I just need to say, I'm looking forward to what you have prepared for me this morning, Lord.
Yeah. So Charles, as we get towards a close, does this end in New Zealand? You do one city and you're done, or what's God talking to you about?
Yes. So recent weeks, I have gone back to the United States since COVID lockdown. And one thing I've discovered in my journey throughout Texas and then ultimately to Washington, D.C. and then Colorado was there's a groaning in the States. There's a longing. There's something very, very profound and beautiful. And I think you guys all know it. That gave the founding, let's say, identity of the nation. I know how important that is because I'm doing founding identity for a city. Okay. And I know that it just doesn't, you don't change your name like a family name. You don't change it. If it's named as name, you guys are named the United States of America, not just States of America or America. But the united is the key word. And because the essence of America is the uniting all of these states together. And I think there's a longing for unity again rather than division. there's a longing for oneness again, because you guys are so strong when you guys when we are so strong, because God is a united, he's a united form. He's not divided among themselves. And so I think what the Lord's put in my heart is, why don't you go and create a ecosystem, start something that can give a glimpse of radical inclusive oneness. And see how profound one could go with that. I mean, I really believe it. Like, when humanity comes together, we truly are profound in terms of both inspiring of who we are to each other, but also to what we can do. Let me give an example. The very first time that humanity really came together was the Tower of Babel. Okay, and they built almost, even God himself says these guys can do anything. And because we're made in the image of God, like, the truth is, when we come together, we are actually showcasing a bit of image of God. But when we're coming together for ourselves, we're actually robbing him of his glory, and we're not fulfilling the fullness of that. And so what does it look like to come together, not with fear, guilt, and shame, but faith, hope, and love in God, but not creating a sick, kind of like a Christian community, rather radically inclusive. I'm talking about Muslims, I'm talking about any kind of religion. Come on in. And I can show you that then the true light will shine forth and lead us the way to, this is what I believe in, but I learned the very hard way. A lot of people try to do inclusiveness by being gracious and being merciful, perhaps. Yeah. But if you boil it down to engineering, I was boiling it down, okay, what a nature unites. I was thinking, what a nature unites. And I could say, how can we learn that as a proxy to how do we build communities? And when I was contemplating on this, is that we all unite around the sun. When the sun is down, we all go into isolation. We can't even see each other. So, but when the sun is up, we can see each other. So there's something about light, truth. We rally around what is true and what is light. If you cannot build unity in a community without truth and light. You do not rally around lies. You do not rally around concessions. You rally around what's true, and then we all change to meet what's true, because the sun is not going to change for you. But we as a plant can adjust we plants or animals can adjust our posture towards light or against it. And that's like the fireplace at night. When we have the fireplace and people huddle together and have a song together, we huddle around light always, historically. And so I guess we're creating cities of light, not religious cities, but cities of life. That really stands for what's true about him, what it means to be human, to be made in the image of God.
Wonderful. I read last night in Romans chapter 9 in the Message, it said, compassion doesn't originate in our bleeding hearts or moral sweat, but in God's mercy. And it's a lovely phrase. So seeing God's mercy, seeing God's light, seeing God's goodness in the design of a city, in a place. It's interesting because my wife and I often talk about this. One of the first jobs that God did was to prepare a place. He created a place where he welcomed Adam and Eve. And the last job is preparing a place again. We know that we're going to have the marriage feast to the Lamb, but Jesus said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And such a passion on God's heart to prepare places for people, because that is a reflection, as you say, of him inviting us into an intimacy with himself. It's not about physical place, but it's about a fungible expression of his desire for intimacy with us. And I think you've really described that well, Charles. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Brett. I have one request, and it's just that we are genuinely thinking the next 6 to 9 months to move to the United States. And to do what God has put in our hearts there. I really feel the Holy Spirit's opened that door, and it's a challenge for us because it's quite different, but we're willing to go and serve where it's needed. And the question really is, we want to see whether there's remnants in the nation of the States that we can connect with and do some national significant projects.
Fantastic. Well, we'll certainly put that word out there. Charles, thank you so much for taking the time. Bless you and give you great courage, because I know it takes courage to do these type of things. And but it's good to see that you're joyful in doing it, and that I know from our brief interactions that God has given you a joy in your spirit, which is indeed a source of strength. So blessings to you as you do what you're doing.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you for your wisdom and your kind words.
You're welcome.